those little hangout boxes for Alex a while back, and I was using plastic actually for the screen. I mean, for the mirror.
Yeah, we had
Uh,
vacuum plastic. I got a picture of that somewhere with a little
what
C920, a 920 like just like embedded.
I gutted a 920 and built it onto the back of this plastic with a cover over it, and it worked fine. They were cute little boxes. I might even have some of the parts around still.
I think
My
we're within 2 years of Apple putting webcams behind the screen.
Padcaster.
I think there's some physics problems with that.
Who
but-
knew there would be,
What do I know? I'm
fingerprint
not very
scanners
smart.
behind screens before there would be cameras behind screens?
The OLED stuff is going to allow for things like that. Oh, and I think I know why a lot of us have problems with the mute not working. I'll bet a cookie it's because your cursor's off the main screen and is in some other screen.
I think that spacebar is the devil.
There's also a setting. There's a deep setting for allowing that to happen when you don't have screen focus on the main window. Way down deep, there's a keyboard command Shift A or something like that that'll mute unmute without
Shift
the
Command
focus.
A.
Yeah, there you go. But you have to
Shift
set
Command
that there's a global tick box. You have to set that for it to
I
work.
think for me it was on by default. It just
Okay.
it reminded me.
All right, everybody. Welcome to office hours. We're just getting started here now that it is top of the hour. And we'd like to welcome you all here. If you're brand new, this is we do this every morning at 7 o'clock. We get here a little earlier. So the doors open at 6. So if you're wondering why you might be in the attendees and not in the panel, it's because people got here early and let's see here. Hold on. I'm going to make you host, making Chris host there. So we got here early, about 6, between 6 and 6:30. A lot of people come in all the way up until about 6:45. We're adding people in. We do some mic checks to make sure everybody looks and sounds okay. And then we start. So if you're in the attendees and you want to be in the panel at some point, just make sure you've got good audio and good video and then come in early. Also, if you're here by 6:30 in the morning, we are 6:30 Pacific Standard Time. We are distributing the Discord invites that last for about 30 minutes at 6:30. So you can get on Discord if you feel like doing this all day over text. Some people decided they wanted to do that and they're crazy enough to do it. And we're having a great time over there. So definitely come in and check that out. We do broadcast, if you're watching on YouTube, we do broadcast the middle hour of the 3 hours that we typically go. So we have this first hour, the first 6 to 7 is just whatever we feel like talking about as we come in. 7 to 8, we'll answer questions and discuss stuff, but we don't have as much of an agenda, but we just answer Q&A. And then at 8 o'clock on many days, we have a more focused discussion. Today, we're going to talk more about kit building. And we've got Kevin Maurer and Marty Brennis, who I've worked with for many years, talking about that at 8 o'clock. So 8 to 9, we'll discuss that. If you are a panelist, if you're new to the panelist thing, if you have a question that you want to ask, put up your digital hand, a little blue hand, and so raise your hand there. If you want to talk about the subject matter that we're talking about at the moment, raise your physical hand. That tells me that you want to add something to what we're talking about as opposed to you want to change the subject, and which is totally reasonable. Sometimes we go off into rabbit holes. And so definitely just raise your digital hand if you want to ask a new question, raise your physical hand if you want to contribute to the conversation, and know that sometimes I'll just keep moving. So there's, we have some panelists and we're talking about something, but we'll have about 150, 160 people here that we're, within the next couple minutes. And so I'm always thinking about what everybody's watching. So, so I may move on and change subjects abruptly as I decide to kind of keep moving things forward. If you want to, we got a couple of things coming up this week. This is the last second hour, that has an extra hour to it this week. So Friday we will not have it. I've got a production on Friday, so we won't have a second hour or a third hour for some of us. But on Saturday we are going to have the standard long Saturday. So on Saturday we're going to have 9 a.m. I'm going to be, in addition to us talking from 6 to 9 a.m., I'll be talking at 9 about compositing graphics and the ATEM switcher. We've got Final Cut Deep Cuts with Steve Bays is going to be here at 10. At 11, Memo Live. Oliver Breidenbach a bunch of us have a free copy of Memo Live, and we're all learning it together. So Oliver will be here again. And at noon, Photogrammetry Basics to iPhone, and we'll be talking about getting the models that we're creating with photogrammetry into an iPhone. So we'll be talking about Reality Converter and Composer on this next one. So anyway, that's what we've got coming up. If you're watching this and you like what you're watching and you want to share it with other people, we let you do that too. So I'll put there's the panelist in the chat. I'm going to put I have a little link there. You can share anywhere you want and invite people to this if it makes sense for you. If you are an attendee and you want to ask a question, use the Q&A. If you want to chat about things, use the chat. But there's a high probability I won't see the chat, so it's best to put questions into the Q&A area for that. So, without further ado, we will get started. We've got one question up here right now. This is from Philip Oler. He said, I did my first test with Memo Live and WebRTC yesterday. Had 6 remote cameras coming in. We had issues with echo, even though everyone had the reduce echo selected in the Memo webpage. We are concurrently conducting a Microsoft Teams call to communicate. Any suggestions on what to check to reduce the echo? Not everyone had the issue.
Where?
Yeah, that's just a pre-broadcast check of everyone's setup, I would think.
Well, I think that the issue is that there's a couple of things that will defeat echo. So things that will cause echo. Number one is definitely don't run two things on your computer at the same time that are talking. So if you're using Microsoft Teams, I highly recommend against that. If you're going to have 6 people and do some kind of group call, so do a Uber conference or some other meeting. Have somebody else start a Zoom that everyone can call into, but use your phone to have a side conversation. Don't use your computer, because what's happening is you're adding a set of variables to your computer of I/O that's going on there, and you want to be able to turn your phone off and have your phone mostly in a headset and not trying to do 2 things at one time. My guess is the echo that you're seeing is people not having their switches set up with Microsoft Teams and doing that at the same time. But if you're going to test something, I mean, and this is a generalized suggestion, is you just want to always minimize variables especially when you're testing something, is just don't have too many things going on at one time. Test the most simple version of what you have, and then slowly add variables to it. So get the basics working, then increase it. You'll notice, like we've been talking about our little Skype tests that we're doing. For us, it's getting the very, very basics working, and then just keep on adding complexity to it until it breaks, and then you know what variable was added. So you had a lot of things going on at one time. You have what I would do is I'd probably first get Microsoft Teams off your computer. I mean, not off your computer, but don't use it while you're doing it. You use a phone call to do that. Microsoft Teams is fine; it's great, but don't run it at the same time that you're running something else that you're trying to talk to. So use your phones for that. Get it off the platform for your side chat. Then, so that's the number one. And number two is, if I'm having echoes, what I would do is I'd remove everybody and I put one person in at a time and just see where the echo begins. That way it's easier for you to figure out who it is. That's why one of the reasons when we're preparing people for these events, if we've got a bunch of people that are actually going to present on a show, we will work with each one of them individually and make sure that everything's working on their side before we add 6 of them together. And a lot of people will just add everybody together for a rehearsal. We want to work with every person, make sure their connection's good, make sure their lighting's good, make sure their audio's good, make sure their camera's good, make sure they're not getting any echo, they're not doing all those things. We want that to work, so we think that when they come in, they're as clean as they can be. Then we bring them in for a rehearsal, or we bring them all in together to see how they're doing together. And sometimes new things happen. Now, the other thing that can cause echo is any kind of delay. So if you are delaying your audio in any way, shape, or form, you can, if the speakers are open, but what I would say is I saw Phil said that need Teams for interactivity. You just need to not I would just not do it on the same platform while you're trying to figure out if it's working or not. So you can use Teams, whatever, and you might find that you can put them back for that. But I would take all of that away until you figure out why it's not working. But then again, the other thing is, we try to push everybody on these interactive calls to headphones as fast as we can. Now I use a little IFB that you see here. Even people hanging up headphones, the echo cancellation is not I mean, you can use it, but it's a recipe for anything that's high profile or anything that you want to do that you're actually going to broadcast. You want to figure out a way, if you can, to get people out of their, off of using speakers and onto headphones, because you don't want to depend on that. It reduces the quality of everybody's audio, and it reduces theirs because it's tearing audio out. Like, it's taking whatever's coming out of the speakers, it's removing that from their audio, because that's what it does. That's how you do echo cancellation. So it's not, they're not going to sound as good. You're going to have echo issues. You could have echo issues. So if you're doing a little, something small and you're just kind of having fun with it, it's fine to have everyone have open speakers. But once you start deciding you're going to do a broadcast, everybody should have headphones. Or some kind of in-ear or something that's going to not use. It's not. I will argue that it is not professional for a large broadcast to use open speakers when people are talking into it. It's something that we're comfortable with and we do, but it's not something that we would recommend for a broadcast. Now we still have to do it every once in a while, because especially right now we can't supply the hardware that we need, because it's hard to get it to people in the time frame that we have. But we don't. That's not a good practice, and we know that we're compromising every time we do it. Leland.
Yeah, with WebRTC involved in this, there's usually three main reasons. One, Alex covered completely, which was the acoustic echo with speakers and no headphones. The other things that we've encountered are two. One, if you're using a WebRTC virtual camera inside a component like Zoom, or you're broadcasting out to Facebook Live, make sure those tabs are closed or muted. If you're trying to watch the broadcast while you're in the broadcast, you're going to be feeding back that echo. So that's one of the other issues.
Yeah, if there's a lot of echo, if there's a big distance in it when you're doing the stream, that happens all that. Like there, it used to be when we started Hangouts, you'd start a Hangout, you read Hangouts, and you start the live thing, and then you'd hear it, and then the worst part is you had to tell operators, don't panic.
Open? Somebody's got a tab open somewhere.
Yeah, don't panic. And yeah, so yeah.
And then it also, with cell phones, there are a lot of cell phones that don't have good acoustic echo or good echo cancellation quality. So sometimes those mics sink right back into the phones and you pick up that echo really quick. The last one would really just be an open device somewhere. If somebody's playing around with two devices and they've got a computer and a cell phone or another computer, that other computer's mic could be open, or that other cell phone could be open. So those are the things to check. But I would recommend muting people first, rather than having each person go out and come back in. Just mute them all and find where that echo is located. So if you mute one person at a time, you'll usually be able to determine where it was at.
And again, what a lot of times what we do is we try to bring people in one at a time, though. We just send them the link one at a time. Like, hey, this is working. And then we just add them, in. You can definitely mute them. But one of the things we try to do is just kind of add people in one at a time, especially if it's the first time we've gotten to see them. And again, if we're actually doing a broadcast, we want to talk to everyone ahead of time to do that. Colin, you had a note?
I was just going to address the customer service side of it right quick, because as you say, yes, you test with everyone, but inevitably you're going to have one guy who doesn't have headphones or something, and he has no echo. And then you have somebody else who doesn't have headphones or can't be bothered to get headphones. And they say, this other guy has it and it works fine, but I don't. Why am I causing the problem? And this is where you have to point out things like, well, you're on a laptop with a microphone installed, 6 inches from the speaker instead of, at the opposite corner of the device, and that sort of thing. People get very defensive about this stuff. So you have to blame the hardware where you can in those cases. It's just a customer service thing.
We tell them, hey, like if you don't have headphones on, or if you don't have this is no, what we do though is we prep people for it. Like, this is the problems that we're going to have, because we know that those people in a broadcast are going to go back and watch their video because they were in it. And so the big thing is that we tell them, hey, we recommend this. We recommend that and there's some people that don't want to test. Like, they'll be like, oh, I don't want to spend the time to do the test. Or I don't want to, and we'll say, well, here in an email, here are all the problems that may happen if we don't do this, and here are all the things and we just lay it out of these are the issues, and we also talk to the client if that person's not the client, if that's a contributor and the client's paying for it, we tell the client that we have concerns because of X, Y, and Z, and we lay all those things out. Now, as a production person, I will tell you that those emails are super important because those are what we call CYA. So you send all these things out, and you send these they're nice emails. You're not throwing a tantrum over it. You're not whatever. You're just letting people know that these are the issues we're going to have if we don't fix these things. And when people follow along, everyone's like, wow, that was a lot cleaner than we usually see from Zoom. And when they come apart, you have an email that said this is what was gonna happen if we don't do those things. And so the thing is that the key is knowing what to ask for from the client or from the contributor, and then being able to define that for both of them in writing when they're not giving us what we need, and telling them what the risks are going to be, because it's very hard for them to come back and say, well, why did this fall apart? It's all your fault, when you've already defined that this is going to fall apart because of this. And so it's super important to kind of manage people's expectations in writing, but without any kind of emotion. You don't want to sit there and have it be like, this is all going to come apart. You're just like, these are the anomalies we're expecting to, like, if they're connected on Wi-Fi, we'll tell you, well, when you watch, you may see this thing where you freeze and you hear your voice pop up and down, especially a musician. And that's because you're using Wi-Fi, and we'll just tell you what that is. And we'll say that you'd sound a lot better. We're working with some musicians recently, and they've been being asked to perform all the time on their iPhones into Zoom, which is like probably the worst way that you can perform music into Zoom, because there's no controls. You can't go to original audio. You can't turn off all the noise cancellation. So you've just trashed your thing, and suddenly you just use the open mic on your laptop is better than your phone. If you don't have any kind of external device for your phone. And so anyway, suddenly they sound much better. A note, by the way, for folks who are just new to the panel, don't answer anything in the Q&A. It causes a huge problem on my end. If you the panelists should not answer the Q&A. The Q&A is something I have to bring in. It disappears for me on my end if you do an answer. So anyway, I forgot. I need to put that, Shannon, if we can put that in my notes. I got to make sure that I give people those instructions when we start.
One other thing, while we were thinking about bands, right quick, I don't know if anyone else has noticed, there are a lot more bands performing to click tracks and putting it together for late night TV. They now have the guest musicians doing that on a regular basis.
That's
cool.
Why we were talking. That's why we were talking about it yesterday. Was what we need is someone to build an app that does that really easily. Because right now it's still a more technical process to put that together. It's relatively easy. It just takes a lot of work, and I'm surprised that someone hasn't given the attention to that it's getting for these click tracks, that someone hasn't built something that someone can just pass that click track around and easily have a phone app that just lets them record video and audio. I'm kind of amazed that app hasn't occurred, because I don't think it's technically that complicated. Sky.
Go for the cup of coffee. That's when I got called.
Yep.
Chris earlier was talking about he would only use Grass Valley because that's what he was built in, and all this new toys of technology that's coming up. Earlier, you just mentioned about, well, that's what you do as a professional, which you've kind of been fleshing out. But as this new technology emerges, as the young kids that don't know the old school, the old ways, how do we unencumber ourselves of adopting the new technology, but also still keeping it professional? In that,
well, I think that
the definition of professional in this new age and this rapid change of stuff.
If you can produce something that sounds as good without doing those things, then don't do them. But the main thing is that what we really kind of focused on, because I didn't start in a truck. I didn't start in a broadcast truck. I did a long time ago, but because I didn't start in a truck, and we started with laptops and IO Expresses and everything else, we only took on the things that made a difference. And I think our adherence to pushing people towards headphones, for instance, is not what we wrote up because we thought that might be a good idea. That's after the first 150 to 200 events, we found that it was way better if people just wore headphones. And so, and we found that we had a lot less echo cancellation. We had a lot of other things. And, we used to buy the auto in-ear, the auto version, which is a cheaper version of this. We buy those by the 50 packs, so we just mail them to people, we just mail them a little thing, because that with a little extension where they can throw that in just fixes so many problems very, very quickly. And I believe that pretty much everybody should have their own. And what's funny is, if you're a broadcaster, if you're a host on a show, they all have, I'll show you this they all have this part from Audio Implements, and Audio Implements is the one that makes these. Now, what they have is this end here is usually a custom to their ear, but broadcasting hosts all have this one piece. They don't expect to have this other piece here. Now, sometimes they'll have the two of these together, but often, you order them all in separate pieces. So this is actually the speaker unit, but then we bring the interface, to that, and we snap it on. And that's why Audio Implements is such a standard for stuff, is because it's got components, and they can just keep the problem with the Auto one, which I have around here somewhere, but is that it's all one piece, and so you can't kind of have the hosts have their own. But if you're really getting into this, investing in either an Audio Implements or an Auto that you just have in your bag with a little extension. I have like a little extension cord that just goes to it, because it's a little. You can buy longer cables from Audio Implements, but I just have an extension that I kind of carry around with it, and it just makes it a lot better. I mean, the next step up from there is the using the Phonak. I don't know if anyone used the Phonak. It's the the Phonak is outstanding. So anyway, it's TJ's like, I don't know, it's not always great.
When you have a lot of them in an environment, you can start getting.
Not a lot, yeah. I think the most we've used in one environment is about 4 or 5, and that seems to work pretty well. But those are the little wireless ones. If you've ever watched 24 with Jack Bauer putting something in his ear, that's basically a Phonak, and the range is not nearly as good as it shows on 24.
You also need a lot of batteries.
Little tiny batteries, and so but they're great because they're basically wireless in ear, and they use the same. They're naturally set to the same frequency as the Comtech, receivers. So you can just pop one in, and we've done a lot of stuff with them. It just leaves everybody kind of free to move around. If you put someone on something really like a little DPA or Countryman hidden along with that, it's completely invisible to the audience, and they can interact. So Cyprian.
Hey, sorry, I'm just looking at the Audio Implements, and it looks like you need to do a custom ear mold impression.
You don't need to. Need to. So it'll naturally, when you buy it, it'll come with this little. Hold on, let me see if I can.
They say that's the way to go.
Christmas tree.
Yeah.
Here's kind of a close up here. This is the unmolded one, and this is you can get this. I use this one here. They come with little smooth ones as well, but the smooth ones are hard, and I don't like that. And this will really stick in there once you push it in. And the best thing to do is just push it in. Like the thing is like you like it's. If you do it slowly with a guest, it becomes this thing like, they oh no that's enough and everything. If you just go up there and you're just kind of and then you just push it in, it works out better than. There's been a couple people that obviously that I don't do that with, but if they're a regular person, that they usually get kind of the quick treatment. TJ, you were going to say something?
Just with the Audio Implement stuff, it's awesome. But one thing, people will frequently complain that it gets really dim or like they're having audio issues, and like you got to check them for earwax pretty regularly, because when you're sticking them in, like they gum up really easily. That's something I've had a lot of people pass on as feedback on those, is that you always got to check them for earwax.
Well, and the other thing is that we will always on ours, we just buy tons of the tips, and generally we're using for a real host, we'll use a new tip all the time. The old tips are for us to clean and use ourselves. So and there's some theater. I'll get to you, Marty, in just a second. There's some theater to that too. Is that if you even if it's whatever new or whatever, never take it out and just put it on the earpiece. Always have the ear tip in a plastic bag, like little Ziploc, like one of those tiny little Ziplocs. And you do that in front of your guest that you're putting on, so that it communicates to them that you understand that's a big deal for them to put something in. Except for like, it was funny. I did that for Sal Khan, for Khan Academy, and he's like, yeah, I don't care. he's like, I'll just assume those germs. He was just like, don't worry about that. But most people care a lot, so it's just something to think out. Marty, you were gonna say?
Oh yeah, well I was just using those yesterday, and we have the whole coronavirus thing going on, so we're trying to maintain distance. So I had one on me, so I was able to show them, this is how it goes on. This is how, clip this on the back of your blouse. But the other thing I did that I have my Sharpie with me. So when I take a fresh one out and snap it on and deploy it to somebody, before I put it on, I put a little Sharpie mark on the back of it. So now I know that that one is a used one.
Right.
And and they see me do that, so they know that I'm starting with a fresh one, and that kind of helped with that.
Yeah.
I had to do
So
a shoot yesterday, and I literally mounted the lav on a mic stand and had the different individuals walk up to it. So I never had to touch them. They never had to touch me. It was
right.
old school.
It's a new way of going. Kevin, you were going to say?
And I think to the point earlier of that somebody mentioned, kind of the consumer workflow becoming more professional. Like, it's interesting watching my son's Zoom classes for first graders, and they're all wearing headsets after a couple of weeks. They're all muting themselves when they're not speaking, and they're adopting these professional things from such an insanely young age. I think we're going to start to see it bleed into the regular world a lot more.
I mean, if you even look at the way, and Kevin, you're frozen for whatever reason there. You were just, then it straightened up. One of the things that happens is that you start with whatever you're going to do. When people don't have any experience, they just start with whatever they have. Social norms tend to tighten those things up pretty quickly. When the one kid who's wearing headphones and has a microphone sounds way better than the other kids start to do it. In the same way that if you go back to the first video, the first one of these, it was a mess, and we're slowly improving the quality of our setups because of, we're all, seeing each other and we're learning from each other. And I do think that I do like the meritocracy of the process. To get back to what Sky was referring to is, we shouldn't be taking on things just to take them on. But we also want to take on things that work. And look for workability and look for, how are we going to make that better, and throw things away that are superfluous. But there are things that are, having a good mic near your mouth is kind of it just does the thing. And you can experiment with it a lot, but if people can't hear you, eventually you're going to figure out that you need to have a good mic near your mouth. Same thing with headphones. These two pieces really just solve an enormous amount of audio problems. You don't need a lot more than that. To make that work. The Marco LaRouse says, we are planning to stream a virtual vernissage, I'm not sure, from a photo gallery in May. We'll use an A10 Mini Pro and want to stream to multiple platforms, YouTube, Facebook, etc. But the A10 Mini Pro only directly streams to one platform. Which program should we use to feed the stream to multiple platforms, and should we use the internal Mini Pro encoder or have it done via which software? And Paul Shadwell correctly pointed out that Restream.io is what a lot of people use for that solution. As far as that gives you you stream to one place and then from there stream to lots of locations. I do think that I haven't been able to. I don't have a Pro yet. I do have I got the little mini. Here to test, but I haven't plugged it in yet. But I have it here, and but I haven't tested the Pro yet. What I want to do, of course, is do a head-to-head with the Pro versus OBS versus Wirecast versus all these other things. This little elemental that I have, and kind of start comparing and contrasting the quality levels to just see if it makes how much does it make a difference if we use that little one. As a person who uses a lot of hardware encoders, I kind of look at the little one like, well, that'll be good to use sometimes, but I still want my larger encoders, or I want a bigger program to do it. But it may not make any difference at all, and there may be a lot of places where it works perfectly. So we want to test that. I think part of it is really I'm going to get some charts that we throw up and some test footage that we can push into it. The things that we want to test with for encoding are things where there's a lot of things moving. That tends to be the best ones. We have one with my kids running through the backyard when they were much younger that we used to call the Widowmaker, because there's no encoder that can encode it. It can't, at under 50 megs a second, there's nothing that can be done. And so you just play it and it would just slowly come apart. One thing that's really useful is waves. And here in the West Coast, we can run out there and get it, but waves are, taking a camera out and getting some good, and I have some footage that maybe I'll post that I'll use for this test of the shore, where a whole bunch of stuff, that's a lot of detail that's moving, and again, it gets outside of what most encoders can do, but it allows you to see where they break up. And so one of the tests that I have planned in the next couple of weeks is exactly, once I can get a hold of the mini, but with the other encoders that I have, is to push that through it and just see, where does it break up, in that process. The best part of Grant Whitehead says the best part of yesterday's show was 1 minute before the end using Zoom translation for talkback. Has anyone tested that? Yeah, that was just mentioned at the very end, and I don't know if John Idelson is here, but we'll bring him back in to do it. So what he was referring to, and we just had it. That was the very end of last show. He just mentioned it, and it's something that we do need to test, because as soon as he said it, I thought that was a really fascinating one, which is there's a translation function inside of Zoom that way you can tune it in if you're listening to a different language or you want to listen to a different language. That could be a genius way to do TalkBack to folks, kind of in a side channel. And so in our head, it makes sense. But we haven't tested it any further, although he says that it works. So we will see how that goes. The Ernest Floyd says, are there any light meter apps any good, or should I just get a traditional handheld? Go ahead, Jem.
Not really, but I would look at the Lumu Power, which I put into the chat, which is an incident and color meter. It's no C800 from Seconic, but It's a great little meter for a few $100, and it just plugs right into your iOS device. I find it very, very handy. Even in events, we'll walk the stage and we'll use it to trying to dial in our color. Our white color from the board, because it's really hard with LEDs nowadays, and also just for exposure. So it's a good little thing. Just check the chat.
I do use it, and I have a Seconic as well. And I have to admit that I play with both of those. Most of my stuff is still, I just look at scopes. Like I'm just I just want the scope output from the computer. I think that gets back into what we were talking about, new generation versus like people who are used to the light meters are great. But I have, when we're doing green screen, for instance, I'd have DPs that have been doing green screen for a lot longer than I have, out there with a light meter figuring out what all those things are. And I was like, man, I can see it, and you just give me one image and I can tell you exactly where we are. So or one set of scopes.
But the engineers in the television world were replaced by the IT people, and consequently they don't even know that those tools exist. The IT guys, and even at Microsoft, the first guy from Grass Valley that they hired, the media software, he brought in a waveform, and they said, well, what's that? After they'd already been
here comes Scott. Wait, we're going to throw this to Scott. Scott, go ahead.
So I don't know who you are, but I want to hug you, because you just hit one of the core things that drives me absolutely crazy. I'm in the middle of a cloud encoding project, and I've got 4K streams and stuff, and I have software developers telling me how to do stuff all day long. I'm like, have to not break Alex's clean show mantra. They're a bit irritating, because to them it's just software, and they don't realize the choices they make. They put delays in to solve problems rather than solving the problem. Sorry.
Well, and one of the things,
the zeitgeist again of the inertia of an industry.
One of the things
smashed together.
Yes. One of the things that I'm always when I'm talking to folks that are building encoders, one of the big things that I say constantly is, hey, you have all these side channels of data that are coming to us, and you have the raw signal going into your encoder. What would be really great if you just sent the data that we needed for the scopes through the stream. Like this is what's coming to my encoder, so that we could open up a screen that says this is what the raw data looks like, not the compressed data, but this is what the raw data hitting. Because once you've analyzed it, those numbers that are creating that are trivial compared to your stream.
You might as well be speaking kanji. You might as well be speaking a completely different language.
It's starting to sink in, and I've already, and what I find is that there's a hammer that I have called Twitter that I can, that can be bopped on people's heads when but I make the suggestion for a couple of years before I start swinging things. Chris Summers.
Hey, yeah, just seconding what James said. The phone apps work, but not great. Like I will say, we've tested some of those phone apps, and the spot metering is pretty accurate, but the instant metering is absolutely inaccurate because you can't, I'm not going to be able to test something over here. I'd need to measure it from that side. But what we have seen, I was going to say also, scopes. Scopes are so much more accurate than a light meter nowadays. Like we've seen that where we've gotten more old school DPs coming in. They're going around getting a general vibe with the light meter. But when we see the difference on a scope, you have much more resolution in what you can see in the numbers on a scope than when you're working in quarters of a stop.
Yes, Jim.
And yeah, no, I'm primarily using that Lumu Power as a color meter, as a poor man C800. And there's a lot of situations where we're going to a space and they'll have cheap LED lights, and we're just trying to dial them in to the same color temperature and the green magenta shift. And so it becomes really handy for that. It's nowhere near as accurate as a C800, but it's pretty good, and it really helps.
And for us, what we do is beyond the color. What we're really doing with scopes is I just look at RGB parade, and I'm just saying I can see that if you put out a gray card and I'm looking at RGB parade, I can tell you that there's too much green or too much this or too much that, and so we can kind of dial it in. And for me, color is important, and when we're talking to people about what color we want is important. But I'm looking at usually at RGB parade or my vector scope, or those are things that for me tell me if I have a known sample, which is typically a Dumont chart, and I have that I can kind of play with, and I have a known place where my camera is, I can start playing with the lights there. But yeah, you're right. We get an event people, like event lighting, and they're like, I'll be like, so what temperature are you running at? And they're like, oh yeah, it's like 6,800, and I'm like, what? Like what are we like? What am I supposed to do with that? And so anyway, it's a challenge to kind of get through it, which is also why a lot of times we recommend that you got to decide whether you're covering an event or broadcasting that has people coming into it. And if you decide this is a broadcast with people attending, then the people who make decisions about the lights are the broadcasters. If you decide that we're covering an event, then the people who are doing the event in the house decides what the lights are. But you got to, a lot of times when we talk to the client, you got to decide which one is on top. And they'll say, well, they're all equal, and they're not all equal, because if the guys on the stage are making the decisions, then that's what's important. And so it's got to be one or the other driving that decision. Chris Fenwick.
I was going to say that one of the things that I always teach people that I work with is there's a huge difference between fixing a problem and solving a problem. And you really want to solve the problem. A lot of times when you're fixing it, you're like, oh, well, this is bad, so we'll add this or this or this to repair it. I'd rather know why it's bad.
And
right.
I most recently heard the difference between a right solution and a right now solution.
Yeah.
And in particular in a crisis, as I went into Port-au-Prince after the earthquake, you had to clear the rubble in order to redevelop. So there's different levels of help at different times.
And the other thing is that we oftentimes, when something isn't working, there is a conversation about pulling out the knife the best thing for the patient. Like something's not working, but like something isn't right. But changing it may cause a lot more damage than so like you'll see something in a production where that's not right, but pulling it out may cause a lot of bleeding everywhere. And so you go
and to a hammer, everything is a nail.
Right. And so the main thing that we look at also is, can we survive this event with that in it? And then we annotate that so that let's never have that happen again. Let's never get ourselves into this position. But you also don't want to be perfectionist. Like you feel like you have to do everything, and I can be still now. But a lot of times, I look at when you really embrace iteration. I used to have a thing in my office little thing that just said iterate and dominate. Just iterate.
Chris, you're writing this down, right? That's the next.
Yeah, and so I got it because there's a coffee shop here called Dr. Insomnia's, and it says caffeinate and dominate. And one day when I was having my caffeine, I thought iterate and dominate. And so but the point is that you want to be constantly. We write stuff down that we don't like. Constantly during the show, so we're constantly typing what we call I lost it. I was going to say because we use it all the time, but anyway, so anyway, I don't know why my brain jumped off a track. Go ahead, Marty.
Yeah, you just threw. Oh, yeah. Yesterday though, I was chasing the automatic video changes that WebEx was doing, and both WebEx and Skype. I was using these Logitech web cameras that the county had, and I got the Logitech panel up so I can adjust brightness and such, and I was playing with the light levels and such, and I'd tweak it a bit, get it to look nice to my eye, and then the automatics would kick in no matter what my light level was, no matter how I set things, would kick in and way overexpose. I mean, the shader in me is looking at this going, what? And all of a sudden, I'm sitting there blooming out completely. Um, and I couldn't get the thing to stay at a place I liked it. It kept overexposing. And that's where Zoom seems to be doing a perfectly decent job. So now I got to go play with the different platforms to see who has automatics in the video and who doesn't.
Yeah. So anyway, so but you want to be constantly looking at, and again, you want to look at, is this critical? Like this really could go wrong in our show, or is it? And sometimes those decisions are really hard. Like you don't know what the right decision is. I think we talked about one a long time ago where we had a broadcast truck that we only had one generator up. It's one of the cat generators, those big storage containers. We had two of them. But to save $6,000 a day and be good for the environment, we only ran one while we were going there until right the morning of. We were gonna, so at 6 a.m. for 11 a.m. show, we're just gonna turn the other one on. Well, at 3 a.m. the cat blew a head gasket, the other one, and so the truck went down. They turned the other one up, and cat didn't tell us. They just turned it back on again. So they basically hard started the truck, and so we came in, the truck's working. And we were like, it's working now, but then Cat said the problem is then Cat gave us the option to put another generator in. And with that choice, you have to think through, like, if I tell the client that we chose not to put another generator in because it was too close to the show, and then this generator dies and I lose the whole show after one already just died, it's complicated politically to say that. And so I finally gave them a deadline of, if you can get the generator by here, which I thought was an impossible deadline. It was not. Cat's very effective. And so next thing I knew, I had a generator. And so when we switched it over, we carefully shut the truck down and then brought it back up again. And the router, the Harris router, the really expensive Harris router, didn't come back up because evidently it's got two little cards, two controller cards, the primary and the backup, or two even ones. When they start up, one looks at the other one and copies the data to it. And so one got knocked out when the truck was restarted, and it then corrupted the one that was still good instead of going the other direction. And they brought us another card, but after the show, and we had to basically hardwire the truck in. It was the last camera came up 4 minutes before live, and we had to shoot the kind of the red carpet part. We had to shoot with an iPhone and then transfer it and play it out. It was a hectic environment, but that's a good example of really, like, I would never change a generator again like that. That was my lesson, was that pulling the knife out was way worse than leaving it in and figuring out how we're going to deal with it, in a more a better place.
Well,
So
I
anyway,
think you said your priority is to make the client look good. And now, what does it take? What's the technology? What's the best tool?
yeah.
In
Well,
your
look
hand
good
at the moment?
and be safe. Keep clients away from the sharp objects. Because they're not going to know where they are. So your job is to know where the sharp objects are. Jeffrey Rise says, audio implements. I'm not that advanced. The website has tons of receivers and cords. What do we buy? Yeah, I'll put up what we buy. I have to go back and look because I know when I go up to their website too, I'm like, oh, I don't remember which one is which. But I will. If Shannon reminds me, puts it in my little notes, I'll put together a thing of this is what I order, because it is important that you order the right ones, because we've ordered lots of the wrong ones. Like they have the little ones that are like accordion. Those are horrible. Don't ever buy those. They get all tangled up and knotted and all kinds of other things. If you think about your old telephone, for us old enough to remember what an old telephone cord looked like, back in the day. Yeah, don't do that. So we'll put something together there, because that is a useful thing to do. John Wigglesworth asks, any tips for balancing cameras, screens, and lighting? That's a deep question. So I think that the hardest part now is with LED walls. It was easier when we had screens. I mean, what I will say, and anyone else who's working on this can jump in. I have a tendency to want to have, and John and I have worked on jobs where we didn't have this, where I have a tendency to want to put, I think I even mentioned it at the time, is I have a tendency to want to push my LED walls up above my folks. There's a culture to push the LED walls all the way to the stage. And I just, as a broadcaster, I don't want to do that. As an event person, I kind of understand putting the screen all the way down to the stage. But as someone who wants to actually have a good frame for my broadcast, and you'll notice that there was a moment where they did that on some of the broadcasts, like the Oscars and the Emmys, and then the next year they were all up high again. so there's lots of LED walls, but they all stop at about 8 feet for most of these things. There's two reasons for that. One is if you have a problem with the LED wall, which I've seen on broadcasts. It's nice when it's not right behind the person that you're trying to shoot because you can just stay on close-ups and it works. But also, the LED wall creates the LED wall itself. If it's not below about 1.7 mil and it's not more than 10 feet back, is going to cause all kinds of problems with the compression. So it's the pattern actually the pattern of it moving in that basically defeats all of the temporal compression that's there. And it forces all the compression into the spatial compression. And what's funny is that for some reason, encoders grab onto the screen and make the foreground person look like they're like 4 blocks, like there's macro blocking all over the place. The background will be perfectly in focus. For some reason, the encoders almost always grab onto the background and then make the foreground person look really nasty. So screens in general are problematic in that sense. And then you have the problem with exposure with the LED walls, where if the LED wall is at full volume, it's almost impossible unless you're outside to really get it just right. I would say getting folks away from that LED wall a little bit so that you have more of a light pool that you can really give them a lot of light, in that area helps in that process. And then a lot of discussion, with everybody to understand what I think that where we really get in trouble is when there wasn't a lot of testing beforehand. And even small testing, we have small sections of LED walls up in a stage with someone standing in front of it. There's a lot of math, again, for the walls and the lighting, where the size of your sensor, the throw from the camera, all of those things are going to handle your depth of field, and then figuring out how you're going to rig it. And that's one of the big reasons that we also like to LiDAR our locations now. So, taking even a little, and now we're going to be able to do it, hopefully, sometime soon with our iPads. I haven't tried to do that yet, but for very low resolution. But even like a BLK 360, I've been borrowing one from Brent Schnarr, who may be here today. But even something like that, you just throw it in and grab the data. That way you can start to reproduce exactly where those lights are going to be in your stage show in a warehouse. And I do a lot of pre-pro in warehouses to, on a big show, to figure that out. And if you don't need to do that. But if you don't do that, you should really think about keeping it simple. So there's a whole thing of like, if you have if you're going to do an LED wall, or you do something really complicated, make sure to budget in the testing for it. If you can't do something complicated, then do something simpler that you can do well. Chris Fenwick.
The other day, Jem Schofield was showing me an app that he uses in some of his online training, where he can put a person, and then it seems like this might sound stupid to somebody who does as much 3D as some of us do, and I do none. But he's putting in different types of lights, and he can control the whole look of it to show somebody what something's going to look like. And it seemed like it was friendly enough that somebody like me could use it, as opposed. Yeah, Jem.
Go ahead, Jem.
Yeah, it's made by a German company. It's called Set a Light. Elixir is the name of the company, and it's really designed for photographers. But they have continuous light fixtures in there, like sky panels and some other things. And they have models, and you can do, you can set the size of your room in feet or meters, and it is just becoming a really quick, easy tool for me to use as an educator when I'm teaching how to light. You also have Cine Tracer, which is still in beta from Matt Workman, cinema, database. That's an interesting one as well to use for lighting. And there's a couple of other things, but I think set a light is something that everybody could get their heads around, and it's only about $150 US.
Okay.
And
In the moment, Paul Shadwell, we're viewing our next generation, our next audience right now. And what other opportunity of take your kids to work would this look like?
Yeah. Okay.
I think that's
exactly.
awesome.
Yeah,
awesome,
that's great.
Paul.
Yeah, that's good. Marty, go ahead.
Oh yeah, no, I was going to say the best experiences I've had with video production with LED walls. There's a couple of companies I work for that own LED walls, do LED walls, but they also have the full camera package, switcher package, and all of that. And they've spent the time in the shop to know how to build the show so that they get the least amount of moire and issues coming up.
Well, and the problem that we've had with some of those folks, I think we're talking about the same people, is they have all that stuff, but they don't have the encoders. And so they're not live encoding to a platform because the moire is the big problem. But once you get past moire, and moire is, of course, the patterns that we get at certain zoom lengths when everything kind of syncs up with your LED wall. But something may look perfect without moire, and it's still destroying our encode. So that's the problem, is that we are trying to kind of move them forward in a thought process. We talk to a lot of them going, hey, you really need to put this, you need to stream this to YouTube or stream it to Facebook and stream it to different ones, whatever platforms you think you might go to see how those compression settings are going to be affected by that LED wall. And, there's some, and that's the thing that we see, is that you're absolutely right. They do a lot better from the moire perspective, but without putting the encoders on the other end and without putting it out on the web, because the other problem is that the end encode, the VOD encode that happens 4 hours or 8 hours later on YouTube, is not the same as the live encode. So it actually, oftentimes, some of those issues will go away on the re-encode that it does from the original source data. So it's really important to stream it live and to actually look at it while you're testing. Now, Kathy Louise Sanders says, to Alex and the other panelists, what's your opinion of 5G? Is it beneficial or detrimental? I don't know if it's detrimental. I just don't think it's going to happen it's going to affect us for a long time. I don't think, especially now. But I don't think there's anything wrong with 5G. I think that it's a little bit of for me, I'm sure that it'll be great someday, and we'll look back and we'll say, wow, what about life before 5G? But we have to remember that where I live, for instance, I live a little outside of San Francisco. Maybe I see it before my kids go to college. That might be possible if I'm not downtown in a city, and it's a little bit of a thing. So I feel like this race for 5G. I think we could fix a lot of these things for the amount of money we're spending. We could fix a lot of things with a lot of other, LTE for the most part is fast enough to do a lot of things. I think that the low latency and everything else with 5G is going to be very exciting for people who are trying to make money. But I'm not sure how much it's going to affect our day-to-day life anytime soon.
Hey, Alex,
I do think it could eventually. Hold on. You got to slow down a little bit. So I think that 5G is interesting. For production, it's actually super interesting, because in a controlled environment like Arena, where we can put 5G in, now you have low latency camera feeds, and there's enough bandwidth to carry those low latency camera feeds around for wireless and so on and so forth. I don't know how much, Scott, I don't know how much tests you've seen with some of the camera feeds in arenas.
Yeah,
have you seen any of those?
Quite a bit. 5G hasn't really been part of any of that testing. Like I've seen 5G bonded stuff, but nobody's gotten that far down the road yet, Alex. There's a couple of wireless companies that are playing with that pretty heavily, as far as a camera back that is 5G, that gives you, and the big thing is that one of the things that's important with 5G as it relates to Wi-Fi, a lot of the arenas that have 5G going in also have really, really, really good Wi-Fi. But the issue is that the handoff is better. So when you're taking Wi-Fi and you're going from one zone to another, there's these places where you're dropping off. From one AP to the other is not seamless when you're dealing with video. When you're dealing with your phone and you're walking along, you don't notice it, but on a camera you do. 5G, it becomes a much better mesh, and obviously lower latency than the Wi-Fi there. And so I think that's a different different process there that works out pretty well. I'm going to get one more question here in. Let's see if we can get this in before we run out of the top of the hour. I watched a live
real
play.
quick,
Yes.
Wi-Fi 6 also helps a little bit on those
Yes.
latency issues and handoff issues.
Yep. No, you're right. Absolutely. Wi-Fi 6 is and I, you know, we're spending all this money on 5G. You know, 6G is already, they're already planning 6G, you know, 2030. And I'm wondering whether 5G will actually get deployed before 6G, they start pushing 6G out, which is going to be amazing from the specs I've seen. It will be outrageous. Anyway, I watched a live play yesterday on the New York City Public Theater website last night, and I was pleasantly surprised with the result. It confirmed to me that there is much that can be done online. They used Zoom. Why do you suppose it was choppy off sync on their website or on Facebook while the image and sound quality on the YouTube app was perfect? I watched it over Apple TV via a QME 8 projector. Can you help me identify what could have caused that? Do you necessarily do you lose that much when embedding on collateral platforms? And strategy-wise, is it in that case wiser to corral your audience towards one dedicated or tested and secure platform, or do it without other platforms, choosing quality over quantity? And I think that what I would say there, and other people can jump in, but what I would say in that respect is that as a publicly available encode, I still find that YouTube's probably the highest quality kind of general purpose public encoding that is out there. And so you may have that embedding to YouTube will not maybe any different than embedding YouTube will not be any different than watching it on the site. The player is the player. And the same thing with Facebook. The embed process will not make it any different. The other thing is that once you decide you're going to do your own white label, I would say that, you know, then Akamai is kind of if you're going to do something of that level, I would probably be thinking about how to use Akamai, you know, for that type of distribution to, you know, if I'm going to do a white label. And there's also live stream, but I don't think that the live stream transcode is, well, with Akamai, we're building our own ladder. so, you know, like we're sending our own ladder into Akamai. We're not having them transcode. I think they can transcode. I've just never tried it. Yeah. But yeah, they can do it. I've just never done it. When I'm using Akamai, generally I'm building my own ladder and putting it in as exactly the way I want it, which means the bits that I create on my encoder are the bits that the viewer's watching. And it gives me the ability to fine tune that to exactly what I want, and exactly when that ladder is going to jump back and forth, and what levels, you know, I decide what those are in the adaptive bitrate settings. And so when you send it off to someone else to transcode it, it's never going to look that good. Ever. Like, it's never, because they have a generalized encoding profile that is supposed to be good for sports, and it's supposed to be good for presentations, and it's supposed to be good for people doing it out of their phone. And that generalized solution is never going to be as good as the specialized solution that you can create on your own encode, whether that's in the cloud, whether it's in like the Amazon cloud, or whether it's on Elemental, or whether it's on, you know, whatever you're doing to build those out. That's going to be now I'm just kind of touching on way more quality. If you're looking for the stretch, that's where you go with that. And then the reason that what we don't know with this one is whether with the quality, were they streaming with the same hardware and software to all the different platforms? They may not have been. They may have had a really good encoder that was encoding to YouTube, but something of lower quality that was going to Facebook. Now, one of the things that can be done, and I don't know how much they got out of Zoom and why it would be that much, you know, cleaner. Now they're using Zoom's own streaming, which is what we're using right now. So we stream to YouTube via the Zoom app, just using the API connection, and that is anyway. It's fine, but we do see a lot of breakup there too. So if they may have been using different techniques at different times for that play. They might have been using a screen scrape, for instance, for YouTube, and then using the Zoom app for Facebook, and that could definitely do it. So without knowing more about what their architecture is, it would be hard to tell why one's better. It shouldn't be significantly different between Facebook and YouTube at 720p. But remember that YouTube, of course, can let you stream to 1080, 4K, you know, that type of thing. Has anyone seen new question for us to think about? We won't talk about it here. Is has anyone seen that? I'm seeing conflicting reports at YouTube that YouTube will support HDR live.
Yes.
They'll do uploads live. We know that, But what I see is there's mentions of HDR live to YouTube, but what I don't see is any instructions on how to do it. So if you see that, let us know in Discord, and I'm gonna try to figure it out myself. But
Pretty
I'm kind
sure
of really
it's
interested
just
in
a
that.
setting, Alex, that you allow for the HDR or not when you actually either upload this. When you start
No,
the
when
stream,
you
there should just be a check mark there that allows you to put the HDR.
There's a check mark in I haven't seen that check mark in YouTube.
I'll
In
go
YouTube,
dig it. I'll see if I can dig it up before we're
Okay,
done
yeah,
here.
no, absolutely, because I want to play with that a little bit. Last question, and then we're going to move on. Nikolai says, do you use devices to aggregate signals from multiple SIM cards into one solid internet connection? So we have used the Teraduct Bond. The one that we use the most is the LiveView. LiveView is just the one that just works. You know, like you have to have a server on the other end, and you have a backpack, and then sometimes we add on top of the backpack, we'll add an extender, and then you can add Ethernet from the location, grab Wi-Fi from Starbucks, like all these things. Like we just aggregate everything that we can see with it, and it's been the LiveView is the most expensive solution I think that you can use. There's TVU, there's the Teradyc Bond, there's a bunch of other ones, but those are typically the ones that are the most. That's the one that we've used the most successfully. And now we are going to stop the. Have you already sent it back?